The following podcast is brought to you by the Crime Prevention 101 Safety Store, your one-stop shop for personal safety. Come by and browse at crimeprevention101.com.
Welcome to Crime Prevention 101, the podcast with an optimistic perspective on a sober subject. The views and ideas expressed on this program are strictly those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect the views and ideas held by the host, associate participants, or sponsors. Now, here's your host, Crime Prevention Specialist Susan Bartelstone.
Oh boy. Hello, everybody. Now, several years ago, I got the following email. Dear Susan, I'm a 36-year-old female living in the Midwest. Having survived an attack by both a stranger and an acquaintance, I would like to know how one goes about finding any sense of security in her life. I've taken 2 self-defense courses, both of which were very good. I feel more confident in my physical ability to defend myself, but I haven't found that they address the problem I have dealing with the intimidation and the psychological component that attackers use in a sexual assault. Even if I'm physically able to defend myself, it doesn't benefit me if I can't get past the intimidation and fear. Signed, Mary M. And she also mentioned that she froze during the attack while it was going on. This is Susan Bartelstone, here with my partner in crime prevention, Lydia Perez.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast.
She does all the tech stuff here in the Universal Dojo. That's what we like to call it, the place we can all come together to learn about safety. So, Lydia, what do you think? The last couple of podcasts, right?
Yeah, the last few podcasts dealt with the darker side of love. Dating cautions, scams, date rape, and date rape drugs. So we thought this time around, it was time to do some healing. So Susan, what did you tell Mary M. about healing from the after effects of her rapes?
Lydia, I'm going to post a link in the show notes to the email that I wrote back to her for anybody that's interested. And it's going to be posted in the safety tips section of crimeprevention101.com, the safety tips page. But the gist of it is, in truth, most people are going to need more than one healing modality to help them put what happened to them in perspective and get on with their life. And that's any trauma, not just sexual assault, child abuse, substance abuse, any trauma. One thing that you try is not likely to be enough. And I made some suggestions to Mary M. about the methods that I've researched and heard about over the years. These are methods that had really good success rate or decent success rates with trauma survivors.
That's awesome. This will be the first in a series of shows covering non-traditional methods for healing from the debilitating consequences of crime, violence, any kind of physical or emotional abuse or trauma. These are methods that maybe most people aren't familiar with.
Absolutely. These are going to be the ones you don't know about, or probably don't know about. Anyway, today we're going to talk about an extremely innovative, a powerful, scientifically proven healing method called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's simply EMDR. Have you ever heard of that, Lydia?
You know, I know that it's a mental health treatment technique and it probably has something to do with the eyes, but I'm definitely interested in learning more about it. I mean, I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah, this is EMDR. I want everyone to know about this. So on the show today, we're revisiting an interview that I did some years ago on this subject on my former Crime Prevention 101 radio show, not to be confused with the podcast. And I interviewed Dr. William Zangwill, who's one of the foremost practitioners in this innovative form of therapy. Now, the original interview that I did, EMDR had been referred to as the most exciting psychotherapeutic development in the last 20 years for the treatment of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. And for those survivors where EMDR is successful, because obviously no modality is a good fit for everyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, where it's successful, it achieves its healing results much, much faster than traditional psychotherapy modalities. Now, because this topic was so vital and so unique, I did a long interview with Dr. Zangwill. So I decided now we're going to break that interview into 2 podcasts. Mm-hmm. Today you're listening to part 1, what PTSD is, symptoms of it, not just for crime victims, what EMDR is and how it came about, and how it compares to the more traditional kinds of trauma. And then we're going to do a second podcast, and I'll tell you about that at the end of the show. Now, Lydia, when we do these revisits of past radio shows, I usually delete everything but the interview to keep the segment brief.
Right.
Now, I didn't do that in this case because I gave a lot of great information in the original show opening, and I wanted everyone to have that information. Mm-hmm. And one of the interesting things to me, at least, in my intro to the radio show, which was recorded in 2009, I discussed a bill that was being proposed at that time by a former New York State senator named Eric Adams that would legally protect someone who hurt or kills somebody while acting in self-defense, an innocent person who gets killed while somebody was acting in self-defense. Mm-hmm. And gets killed either as a result of the commission of crime or during it. And that person gets killed, it's the criminal's fault, not the victim. That was Eric Adams' bill. And it directly relates to a crime that happened at that time. Now, of course, the really interesting thing for Lydia and I is that Eric Adams is now the mayor of New York City, which is where we live.
Yes. And hopefully he's still in favor of that concept. Do you know if that bill ever became a law?
I'm actually not sure. I don't think so. I did a bit of a check on it, and it was a little difficult to find out. Mm. However, I know what I think the man's punishment should have been. I'm going to talk about that case at the end of this podcast.
All right, then, fair enough. If you're a survivor of any kind of crime, violence, or trauma, if you know or living with someone who's a survivor, or if you yourself treat survivors in a clinical or private practice, make sure you share this important and uplifting show with them.
Absolutely. Now, Lydia, let's take a quick break for an important message. Be sure to stick around. We got some great resources and tips for you, as we always do, coming right up.
You're listening to Crime Prevention 101 with Susan Bartelstone. Susan would like to remind you that no absolutes exist in a crime scenario, and no advice can possibly address every variable. Each situation should be evaluated individually and responded to in the way you instinctively judge best. It's Susan's aim on this podcast to provide you with the information and options that will help you make that instinctive assessment quickly and safely. However, sometimes nothing can be done to prevent a bad outcome. And if you're already a survivor of the kind of crime we're talking about on the show today, or any other crime for that matter, please remember that there are no right or wrong responses in a criminal encounter, and nothing that happened to you was your fault. Even if you think you used bad judgment in the situation and left yourself vulnerable, that's never an excuse for a crime or violence. So please, call yourself a survivor and not a victim. And understand that with time, distance, and the proper professional help, you can put what happened into perspective and get on with your life. Now, back to Crime Prevention 101.
Hello again. Don't forget, you can follow the show on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And if you've enjoyed today's podcast, click that subscribe button and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next episode drop. And be sure to check out the crimeprevention101.com website for free safety tips and resources. And while you're there, don't forget to get Susan's free safety guide, Keeping Yourself Safe. It's a terrific guide with tons of tips, probably some you've never seen before.
That's right, Lydia. Now, let's go to my previously recorded interview with Dr. William Zangwill and learn about the innovative healing technique EMDR.
VoiceAmerica.com. Welcome to Crime Prevention 101 with host Susan Bartelstone. We're so happy you've joined us this weekend. Over the next hour, you'll learn the tips, tricks, and vital information that'll help you keep yourself confident and safe. Now, here's the host of Crime Prevention 101, Susan Bartelstone.
And hello, everybody, and welcome again to another show of Crime Prevention 101. And this is indeed Susan Bartelstone here welcoming you. And I'm really, really excited about the show today. This is the first in a series of shows that I'm going to be doing about non-traditional methods of healing. And I'm talking about healing from sexual assault, from any kind of crime or violence, from emotional or physical abuse, in fact, any kind of trauma. And I've identified 3 areas so far that I'm going to be focusing on. Healing through alternative therapy modalities, healing through self-defense or martial arts courses, and healing through creativity and the arts, nourishment, for the soul. And my feeling is that you need at least 2 of those 3 for the best kind of healing. Today, I'll be talking about an innovative form of therapy, and this is a mouthful. It's called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and thankfully it is abbreviated as EMDR. And this has been referred to as perhaps the most exciting psychotherapeutic development in the past 20 years for the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder. And that has also been shortened to PTSD. And PTSD is what happens after a violent trauma. And it is debilitating. And there has been very, very compelling research on the effectiveness of EMDR therapy for treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder. It's being recommended all over the world by different agencies, and for those with whom it is successful, it achieves its results much, much faster than traditional therapy modalities. So I am just so excited to be talking to my guest today, Dr. William Zangwill, who is a highly regarded practitioner of EMDR and an EMDR trainer. But first, before I introduce Dr. Zangwill, I just have a couple of little tips and items that I wanted to talk about first. Something came my way. Someone sent me an email, and I did a show about these webmails previously, if anyone of you heard it, about the kind of scam emails that people send around to you. And this is a new one where you get an email saying that someone has been hired to kill you or to kidnap one of your relatives, and this email has a lot of personal information in it to make it appear legitimate. And, of course, they ask for a large sum of money from you in order to prevent this from happening. In other words, the killer, if you'll pay him, he won't kill you or abduct your relative. And this is just a terrifying email to get, but it's a scam. It's false. And if you get such an email, you got to file a complaint right away. The Internet Crime Complaint Center, it's called IC3, and their website is www.ic3.gov. And, this is just a terrifying thing. Threats of violence, extortion, it's totally illegal also. So if you ever get that or anyone you know gets this hitman scam, do not fall for this. And I also have a segment that I introduced last week, which I call There Ought to Be a Law. And this is where I get to rant and rave about the stupid things that people do and say regarding self-defense and crime prevention. And this week I'm ranting about a judicial institution. I saw an article in the paper. There was a big article about this. This happened in New York City, where I am based. And a New York City transit worker who was jumped by a group of guys, and they were trying to rob him. He was a martial arts expert, and even though he got stabbed, and he was stabbed severely, he was able to turn the tables on them and get out of the situation. But in the meantime, a bystander trying to help him jumped into the fray. This guy was doing well. He didn't know that this bystander was trying to help him, and he ended up getting killed. He killed the bystander. And originally, the police didn't file charges against him, but the district attorney brought it to a grand jury, and the grand jury did indict him, and he's now going to stand trial for murder. And, I mean, this is just craziness. This is just craziness. And one of the state senator, Eric Adams, who was also a former New York City police officer, and he visited. Now, the person on trial now, his name is Maurice Parks, and he had actually visited Mr. Parks, and he was so enraged by this that he's proposing a law that will say if somebody gets an innocent bystander killed during the commission of a crime, it's the criminal's fault, not the victim's fault, that this person got killed. So he's trying to introduce this law, and he said, and I agree with this, I don't know if it's in the spirit of the law to prosecute a victim of a crime. If he's attempting to get away from someone, and in the process he mistakes an innocent person to be one of his attackers, I think that the person charged should be the one attacking him. Now the people who caused the robbery are going to be charged with a lesser crime than the person who was the victim. And, you know, this does not make any sense to me. And I think this is criminal, and I think that there ought to be a law against this. And I'm with Senator Adams on this one. All right? Well, now, before my guest today thinks I need therapy, I'm going to calm myself down. And I want to introduce Dr. William Zangwill to you and get to the very important topic of the impact of violent crime on victims and how they can recover. Now, his bio just amazes me when I was looking it over. Dr. Zangwill has been a licensed clinical psychologist for more than 25 years, and he's located in New York City and Long Island. And I think he's probably out near me, where I am. Anyway, he was trained in EMDR, that's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, in 1990, and is a highly regarded practitioner of EMDR. He specializes in the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. We're going to use a lot of initials here on this show, and of sexual, marital, and family problems. And he was among the first group of people that were trained to train therapists in EMDR. He worked very closely with Francine Shapiro, who is the originator of it. And he has trained thousands of therapists all over the U.S. and abroad in his methods. And he is also particularly known for combining EMDR and meditation, which we're going to talk about. He's written a lot of stuff, and he's got a great website. So, everybody, I want to welcome Dr. William Zangwill. William, welcome to Crime Prevention 101.
Susan, thank you.
It's just a pleasure to have you here today. And I know you're out in Phoenix. How is it out there?
It's really beautiful, except for the dust storms, of course, that delayed the flight coming in.
Oh,
yes, exactly.
You know, I hope you don't get mixed up with what's going on down there in Texas. That's going to be nasty.
It is indeed.
Now, you're out there presenting at a conference?
At the EMDR International Association conference, yeah. It's a yearly conference of EMDR practitioners from all over the world. And
you're one of the speakers at the conference?
Yes.
Excellent. I bet that's going to be a very interesting conference. Now, before we start, William, I want to read a part of an email that I got a little while ago that I think is going to lead us nicely into the topic.
Please.
I have a website, DearSafetySolutions.com, where people can write to me. I've been dubbed the Ann Landers of self-defense because people can write to me with their concerns, and I help them. And I got an email a while ago from this woman. She said, I'm a 36-year-old female living in the Midwest. Having survived an attack by both a stranger and an acquaintance, I'd like to know how one goes about finding any sense of security in life. She said, I can't get past the intimidation and the fear. I was also one who froze during my assault and was unable to fight back, and I wanted to know if there's a way to combat this. This, of course, is post-traumatic stress disorder, right? These are some of the symptoms.
Yeah, absolutely. It may be, absolutely.
Okay, and people need to learn how to spot these symptoms and to know that they can recover quickly if they seek help. So let's talk about it. What are some of the symptoms of PTSD?
Well, some of the things your emailer mentioned, having trouble getting past a painful event, flashbacks, vivid memories, either in the forms of daydreams or nightmares, difficulty in focusing and concentration, sleep disturbances, sometimes an increased use of substances, in an effort to numb yourself from the feelings. And it sounds like, the person you mentioned has at least a few of those.
Yeah, all sorts of really debilitating symptoms.
Exactly.
All right. We're coming up on a break, William. Let's take a quick break right now. We're going to come back and talk more about some of the ways this is debilitating and how we can help it. And welcome back, everybody. And I am speaking with Dr. William Zangwill. We were talking about some of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, and PTSD can be absolutely debilitating. Correct, William?
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, it would just really prevent healing and all sorts of, as you're saying, drug abuse, all sorts of things that can result from this.
Well, Susan, when people go through a painful experience, there are two things I'd like to mention. One is that most of the people recover on their own. You don't even diagnose PTSD until after 30 days after the event.
Oh, really? No, I didn't know that.
Right, absolutely. The body and mind have an amazing ability to heal themselves. And with the support of friends, family members, and so on, a lot of people go through horrific things and come out fine. So I don't want your listeners to worry that if and when something horrible happens, it means they're doomed for this to develop. But with some people, it does happen, and after those 30 days, the symptoms persist, and essentially a lot of the symptoms we talked about, the numbing, the painful, intrusive thoughts, the depression, sometimes, as you said, the increase in alcohol or drug use in an attempt to, get past this, the nightmares and so on, it's an effort basically to try to cope with the pain of the event that happened that was so horrific.
And this can be triggered, symptoms of PTSD can be triggered even years later by something that just brings you right back to that incident.
Absolutely. One of the examples we talk about when we're using EMDR is that if you were beaten or you were severely hit in a certain area of your body, years later, even when you're with a loving, caring partner or getting some body work or so on, a touch in that same area can re-stimulate the events that happen and as if they're happening in the moment.
Very powerful symptoms, true.
Exactly.
All right, now let's talk about how EMDR deals with this. Now, I know you worked extensively with Dr. Francine Shapiro. Can you tell me a little about EMDR and how it originated?
Well, in terms of EMDR, what EMDR does, I think, better than almost any other therapy is it connects what we know to what we feel. And that's the essence. There have been an amazing number of brain studies at this point that show we literally process intellectual material in a different part of the brain than we process emotional material. And what that means is 10 years after an event, 20 years after a painful event, you can know intellectually that you did the best you could, that you're safe now, you're fine. But the emotional part of your brain can still be terrified. And for reasons, quite honestly, we don't totally understand, what EMDR seems to do is take the knowledge you have now, that you're stronger, you're safer, that you have people around you who can help protect you, and connect it to those painful emotional events and help heal some of those wounds. And Francine Shapiro, the originator of EMDR, reports really essentially having a spontaneous insight back in the mid to late 80s, where she was walking and really suddenly realized that some troubling, emotional, painful memories she were having were no longer painful. She didn't know why, but what she noticed was that her eyes had been moving when she was thinking of this formerly painful event. And so serendipitously, she noticed this. She then tried to do it consciously, by bringing up some painful material, moving her eyes back and forth, and found that, once again, the pain of the event disappeared. And
that's astonishing.
It is. No, she is an amazing person, and she took that insight and through an amazing amount of hard will and determination started going out in an attempt to help others. So she went to clinics that had rape victims, that had at that time Vietnam veterans, people who had had something horrific happen to them and were stuck, in the emotional pain of it. And has repeatedly found, and further research has supported that when used properly with many people, not everybody, but with many people, it can be incredibly helpful at reducing the pain and the self-blame that often accompanies trauma.
So this is a series of structured eye movements?
It can be. Well, it's interesting because, as you mentioned, it is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. But
which is a mouthful.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. But what we found over the years is that any kind of alternating stimulation from side to side seems to be very, very effective. And this was discovered many years ago by someone who had a client who was visually impaired and couldn't move their eyes. So they did alternate tapping, sometimes with their hands, sometimes with people's knees, and alternating tones from one ear to the other. There have been a variety of stimulation that seems to be very, very effective in reducing the pain of trauma.
And do you use a variety of these things in your particular practice?
Yes, because what any good clinician knows is that people are individuals, and what you want to do is find what fits best for that individual. And as one of my sisters mentioned, it's like good accessorizing. And really tailoring it to meet that person's level of comfort, their need, because people respond differently. So some people respond better to eye movements, some respond better to having their hands tapped, some respond better to sounds. And what you want to do clinically is find out what does that one person want and what works best for him or her.
Oh, that is amazing. I'm kind of learning this all myself here now.
Oh, good.
Let's compare this to the traditional kinds of therapy, because you were a clinical psychologist.
Right.
How would you compare this to what traditional therapy does, and why does it work so much quicker?
Well, first of all, people have been helped tremendously by traditional therapies. I don't want to badmouth other approaches, even though EMDR is incredibly powerful. But I think the reason it works better is twofold. Number one aspect of EMDR that many other therapies leave out is making sure that when a person has a painful memory, you access the material in a very rich, vivid way. So you have them, for example, bring up the most painful image of the scene that happened. It could be their assailant's breath, as they're lying on top of them, or the knife against their throat. It could be the sound of the glass shattering if they were in an automobile accident. So you have them bring up the material in a very vivid way, either the images they have, or the sounds, or the smells from the event, or all of the above. You also have them, and this I think is an important aspect of EMDR, is bring up the negative thoughts they have about themselves. And this is something I want to make sure we talk about, because as painful as the trauma is, when you're working with individuals, almost equally painful is how victims often blame themselves. So you want to access that material, you want to get in touch with the emotions they're feeling and where it's resonating in their body. And that aspect of EMDR, in terms of bringing the material up richly in so many different dimensions, is, I think, one of the keys to its effectiveness. The other aspect is it does add this bilateral stimulation that seems to make a difference. And as I said, there's been speculation as to why it may work, but we don't know for sure. But there's some interesting theories about that.
How long is there like a standard, we know that maybe traditional psychotherapy could go on for years. Is there kind of a standard length of time that most people would start responding to EMDR as opposed to a more traditional method of therapy?
There's been some research that suggests that with a single event trauma, with a one-time event that had a beginning and an end, people can do very, very, very deep work in 6 to 12 sessions.
that would be like a one-time assault, an attack, a crime,
exactly.
A crime scenario, not a Vietnam War veteran or something.
Well, the problem is that with Vietnam War veterans who were in combat for, in many different situations, for some of your listeners who unfortunately have been assaulted more than once, what I find much of the time is that there's a connection to previous events. After the Trade Center, a number of us volunteered, to do pro bono work for some of the victims who were there. And what I found, Susan, in almost every case, unfortunately, was that the memory of the event they had seen, the witnessing, the horrific things of the bodies falling or whatever it may be, the helplessness they felt, often connected to earlier memories. So one client, for example, I had saw somebody falling. It turns out that was not his friend, but it turns out he lost a friend in one of the buildings, and it went back 10 years to his fiancée at the time had been killed suddenly in an automobile accident. So the recent trauma not only was painful in and of itself, the losing the friend, but also it stirred up the old memories of the sudden loss of his fiancée. And in both cases, he said, suddenly my world was shattered, and I had no control. So in situations like that, when there's been multiple traumas or multiple events, the therapy is going to take longer.
But it still will not be as long as it could be with more of a traditional psychotherapeutic.
Most of the time, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. It's still, I've been doing this for 18 years now, and it still feels like magic sometimes. But not, again, not with everybody, but at times it just feels great.
Even, 6 to 12 sessions, I think that's amazing to me, and no drugs or anything like that.
Most of the time, no. But again, if somebody has a deep depression, if they have a biological tendency toward bipolar disorder and so on, medication can be a really helpful adjunct.
So this will work with people who have bipolar or other kinds of diagnosable conditions.
Absolutely,
not
absolutely.
just trauma.
It absolutely can. It absolutely can.
Really? Oh, good. We're gonna talk some more about that.
Okay.
Is this covered by insurance, by the way?
It's psychotherapy, and as you mentioned in your introduction, there's been a significant amount of research. So if the person's policy covers psychotherapy, most of the time it covers this. We have had reactions, insurance companies are insurance companies. Some insurance companies have asked for EMDR when it comes to people suffering from PTSD. Other companies still claim it's too experimental, despite all the research, and, don't pay for it. But typically, it is psychotherapy, and if the person's policy covers psychotherapy, they should be covered most of the time.
That is very encouraging. I'm really thrilled to hear that.
Indeed.
All right, now I want to talk a little bit about who is and is not appropriate for EMDR therapy. I think we may be coming up on a break. So you know what? Let's take our break now, and when we come back, let's pick it up there. Okay? So stay tuned, everybody.
If you're feeling insecure or apprehensive about your safety in the world today, and you should be, if you're looking for the best pepper spray, the best tasers, or alarms, or innovative personal safety devices, if you're looking for ebooks to help you heal from trauma, to deal with bullies, to learn self-defense, or whatever concerns you, the Safety Store is where nationally recognized crime prevention specialist Susan Bartelstone has curated the products she recommends and uses herself. Tons of free safety advice is available if you need immediate help. And while you're there, be sure to get your free copy of Susan's guide, Keeping Yourself Safe, All-Time Top Tips. That's the Crime Prevention 101 Safety Store at crimeprevention101.com.
Hello again.
Now, for any survivors listening, whether you think you would like to try EMDR therapy or a more traditional form of therapy, or both, it's very important to find some type of therapy to help you. That's the critical point.
Yeah, that's right. Healing is a process, and for some, it's pretty much impossible without some kind of therapeutic intervention. So here are 3 tips when looking for a therapist. Well, number 1, interview at least 2, maybe even 3 therapists, and choose the one you feel fits you best before you make a commitment to therapy. During the assessment interview, confirm what area the therapist specializes in. And if there are any areas they're uncomfortable with, such as religion or LGBT issues, for example, you want to make sure, if you opt for a traditional therapy modality, that the therapist specializes in or is experienced in dealing with crime survivors, rape, sexual assault, child abuse, domestic violence, etc. Not all are, and this could really set you back. If you feel the therapy just isn't working for you, or you aren't getting anywhere after a reasonable trial period, or you feel you aren't getting along with the therapist the way you thought you could, don't hesitate. Stop the therapy and find another therapist. The important thing is that you just don't stop the therapy.
Right. Now, Lydia, let's give some resources where you can find an EMDR practitioner and where a therapist could contact an EMDR organization. If you'd like to inquire about getting EMDR training for yourself to include in your practice or do it separately from your practice.
Definitely. So we have links to them in our show notes for this podcast. We'll have them on the Crime Prevention 101 YouTube podcast page. So to contact Dr. William Zangwill, who is here in New York City, you can call 212-663-2989. Also check out his websites. There's tons of articles about EMDR and the EMDR meditation connection. The websites are emdrandtraining.com, emdrandmeditation.com. Now, to find an EMDR therapist in your area or get EMDR training to enhance your practice, visit the EMDR Institute at emdr.com or EMDR International Association, EMDRIA.org. Also, on the Rape Sexual Assault tab of our Crime Prevention 101 website safety tips page, you can also access Surviving Rape, Myths and Facts, Surviving Rape, The Road to Recovery, and the accompanying The Road to Recovery Life After Trauma Healing Journal, which is coming soon to the Crime Prevention 101 safety store. And finally, if you'd like to read Susan's response to Mary M., who wrote an email asking for help with healing from her assaults, you can find Susan's response titled Emotional Healing After an Attack, Response to Mary M., in the Rape Sexual Assault tab on the www.crimeprevention101.com website safety tips page.
Wow, that's a mouthful. Got a lot of resources for you today, right?
Yeah.
Well, you know what, Lydia? I think that's a wrap. Please continue to send me your comments about the show. I am so grateful for them. And that way I can continue to present the topics and the resources that will be meaningful to your safety and your quality of life.
And don't forget, you can DM Susan with any questions you have about your own personal safety issues like Mary did on any of our social media channels, or you can go old school and just email her at solutions@crimeprevention101.com.
And if you know someone who's suffering from PTSD because they are a crime survivor or whatever kind of trauma survivor, please share this show with them. It could be so important for their recovery. And tell your therapist friends about it too. Now, the next podcast will be part 2 of my interview with Dr. William Zangwill. And we're going to be talking about EMD, a little bit more about it. Who is and is not an appropriate candidate for EMDR therapy, because not everybody's going to fit in that mold. We're going to expand a little on how to find a practitioner and the powerful combination of EMDR therapy with meditation. So until then, as we say in the Universal Dojo, it'd be a crime not to listen.
So stay tuned and stay safe.